My name is Nicola. I use she and they pronouns. And we are gathered here at Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center in Eastern Pennsylvania in the United States. For those of you who are just joining us, you are sort of parachuting in to a retreat that has been going on now for a little over 24 hours. So we welcome you and hope that you will feel at home here among us. And I'm going to just start us off with a little grounding so that folks can really arrive. You can take just a moment to notice your body, notice your elbows, your knees, your hips. Notice the tip of your nose. Notice the edges of your body. Notice the places where your body is interacting with everything around it. That even in this moment, just sitting here, when we haven't technically begun, you are being changed by the chair that you're sitting on, by the other people breathing the air here, by the things that have been spoken in this room earlier today that are now being transmitted through social media, through video, that we are being impacted by each other and by everything around us, including things that we think are not animate. Take a moment to just notice that reality is fundamentally relational. That even our own bodies are coalitions, temporary, provisional coalitions that will come together and disperse repeatedly tonight and throughout our lives. Notice that you have a connection to land, that if you ate anything today, whatever it was that you ate came from the earth, and that that too is interacting with everything else. We acknowledge that here at Kirkridge we are on Lenape land. This is a land that has been known as Lenape-Hoking. We acknowledge the Lenape people as the proper indigenous people of this land and as its spiritual stewards perennially. So we are also in relationship with Lenape people who may not be in the room. We extend our gratitude for the caretaking of this place, and we make a commitment to the indigenous peoples in this place and wherever you are listening from, that what we would do would serve the flourishing of all peoples. And with that, I will turn things over to our guest of honor, our teacher for this weekend, Bayo Akomolafe.
Thank you. So, when she said 24 hours we've been together, I'm like, what? Just? Feels like 36 hours. We've traveled lifetimes, I feel. And my dear sister, Nicola, and she's my sister for life, you know that. She says to me that the sentiment as she was eating was, I'm full, right? So this is the sprinkling on the top, if you will, just to bring things to a close that it's also an opening. What a junior brother of mine would call a clopening. Okay? So it's opening and closing. Tomorrow we won't be doing any talk. I won't be doing any talking, like I've been talking. We'll be doing some activity, and then we will end with a ritual, a feet washing ceremony. And I'll work closely with my sisters Nicole and Brenda to put this together. So for this night, I want to introduce myself for the last time, at least in this retreat, and to say that my name is Bayo, Ifedapo. Bayo means Akomolafe. A name that I don't usually share that much is Bayo, which happens to be the name of my father and my son. Are those cockroaches? Abayomi and Abayomi is significant for a reason. I was in Brazil once, and I was on a tour, a book tour, and we're taken through a favela. And a couple of teachers who were doing some work in that favela kind of grabbed me for some reason and said, "You should see this, you should see this." And they showed me a rag doll, a doll that had been made from cloth material, black cloth material. And they said, this doll's name is Abayomi, which was intriguing to me, right? And remember, really? How did it come to have that name? Abayomi, which is the name of my father and the name of my son. Did it come to have this Yoruba name? Of course, I'm sure you know that the Yoruba people, when they were transported and incarcerated and taken across the Atlantic in the Middle Passage, a lot of Yoruba people thrived and lived, and their spirituality blossomed. And this is the Òrìshà spirituality, right, that we're speaking about today. It has blossomed around the world, right? You know that, this is just an aside, you know that phallic structure in Washington, what's it called again? That is a shoe. Oh yes. The obelisk came from ancient Kemet. And many scholars link the obelisk to the trickster issue, right? And the trickster issue, that obelisk is, I'm going to put it as delicately as I can, issue's erect penis. So issue, even in the heart of empire, issue is doing his work. But I digress. So, Abayomi, and I heard this story. It's apocryphal. It's not meant to. There's no recorded history of this. In fact, there's a lot of tension around the story. But when you hold the story loosely, not as a historical account, but as it coming to terms with the tensions of capture and captivity, then you can understand the work it's trying to do. One story about captivity was that when those black bodies were stolen, a particular woman, and this is an account of how the rag doll came to be, a particular woman tried to help her child on those ships, tried to help her child find some comfort, which is next to impossible on a ship, on a slave ship. And she tried to hold the child through it, but the child could not find any comfort. Again, this was not economy class. This was a traveling, watery jail. It was misery in technology. And she tried to comfort the child, and the child was not comforted. And so she tore her dress. She tore a piece of her dress, and she fashioned it into a rag doll. and the child was temporarily comforted. And she named this ragdoll Abayomi. So this is the myth, this is the legend, the story that is told about the origin of this ragdoll that has become a symbol of resistance in Brazil. Why Abayomi? Because the name Abayomi means something, and it's central to my work. Abayomi, the long form of Abayomi, Yoruba people have long names. In fact, their names are so long that they become poems. Right? Our names are Orikis. An Oriki is a poem. It's just not very convenient to recite a poem when you just want to say pass the salt, right? So we shorten it to a name, right? But the long form of my name is Otaobayomi Olorunke, which is the longer form of Abayomi. And what that means is the devil would have, or the enemy would have conquered, but God did not allow it. Right? Another iteration of this name, another meaning of the name is they thought they buried me, but they did not realize that I'm a seed. Right? It's the very condition of my oppression and captivity that will give birth to creolized futures, promiscuous futures. And my work is centered on that, seeking openings within closure, seeking the idea of spaciousness, even within the most cramped spaces, singing in a dungeon, saying such joy in a dungeon. That doesn't feel like the thing to do, and yet it seems like the work of decoloniality is to open up other spaces of power with the world. And that's how I want to wrap and bring us to a consideration that will not subsume or easily summarize all the things that we've explored. I'm sure you're bursting with questions and explorations and confusions, and I'm happy, like Adam said, that I've done my work, right? But I want to bring something to a different place and bring us to another consideration of whiteness, right? We want to start where we began, whiteness. Again, whiteness is not white people. Thinking of whiteness as reducible to white people is a function of whiteness. That's how whiteness is. I remember being in Rwanda, and they asked me to give a keynote to end it. The prime minister was there, and everyone was there. It was a huge hall, and the person who brought me up on stage brought me up with something I really don't like as an introduction, or I don't like the saying really. It's cringe-worthy. Is that an expression? Cringe-worthy? It's cringy or cringe-worthy. So the person said, here's this speaker, he's creative, and it was a youth forum, something like that. A creative speaker, he's going to help us think outside the box, and blah, 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 blah. But I got up on stage and I spoke about my life in Congo. I did some growing up in Congo. It's now called the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's called Zaire. I spoke about a lot of things. This was in Rwanda, Kigali, and then I ended by saying, thinking outside the box is exactly how boxes think. and I got down. I'm not sure he got it. In fact, I can readily confirm that he did not understand what that meant, because immediately after the DJ said, "See, he encouraged us to think outside the box." You know. But again, I digress. My effort here is to help us think of whiteness as a material event, whiteness as a moral territory. And we are all affected by this, okay? We're affected in the global south by it. Whiteness is not just the economic, racialized relations that emerge from the antebellum south. It's not just that. It has built alliances with neurotypicality, extractive capitalism, liberal humanism, and the Anthropocene. It's like whiteness is the
dominant planetary algorithm, increasingly globalizing itself. A lot of us in Africa want to catch up. Our political imaginaries and imaginations are so captured by this idea of development and progress that we have a thing called the catch-up imperative, right? So we bemoan our fate. We hate that we don't have as good roads as London does or as you do. We don't have constant electricity. And those are things to talk about, yes. But we are so captivated by this that we've lost our own sense of power. We've lost our own attachments and ecological intelligences. And so we're caught up in this, we must look like New York. You know, we must look like London. If we're not like them, then what are we doing? This is what scholars call the catch-up imperative. So whiteness is not restricted to the centers of its dissemination. It has become, so to speak, colonizing, civilizing ethic around the world. And I think it's the dominant sensorium. The sensorium is how we feel, how we're affected, how we're being taught to respond to crisis. I feel it's the dominant sensorium, the dominant moral field. It's a cup of milk and we're all swimming in it and curdling it. But I want to emphasize that whiteness is material. It is material. It is not universal and it is not evil. Say that again. Whiteness is not evil. Because once you start to name things as evil, you shut down conversation. What then to do? How do we respond? What's the politics that responds to that kind of designation? Right? To notice whiteness as material is to situate it on the planet. Is to say that it also is indebted to bodies in their relations, to microbes. And because it is situated on Earth, by bringing it down to Earth, we might be able to compost it. Right? It becomes recyclable or compostable. Is that, sorry? I'm not used to these terminologies. The practices are not, they're not in where I come from. So it's compostable. It can die then. If it's transcendent, then it's beyond death. But if it's material, then it came from somewhere. It's not ahistorical. It didn't jump out of the blues. It is indebted to worldly events. And like a fabric, it also has wear and tear. It can get exhausted. And my thesis is that whiteness is becoming exhausted. Is becoming exhausted. It's seemingly and increasingly incapable of holding the weight that we all have. Because whiteness's greatest fetish is the dissociated self. That's what it wants to create. That's what it wants to create. The dissociated self. And this is the reason why I said in the afternoon that whiteness is not scandalized by diversity. It's scandalized by spillage. Right? It's scandalized by spillage. It's not scandalized by because you can have, those algorithms in the room. You can have the calculations of diversity, and yet the same buttons are still pushed. The same architecture is still maintained. Right? It was a brother and colleague, Professor Alexander Weheliye, who speaks about, again, the violence of inclusion. The same door that lets you in is the same door that excludes, right? It's the same door that pushes out. What is called into question here shouldn't be how many people you let into the room. It's the violence of the architecture that marks the territory in that way. That is what our politics can address. So whiteness is a material event. And I want to say a little bit about what I mean by this in very as fleshed out as I can say something about it. There is a philosopher called, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but I'm just going to touch on the contours of what he's saying. Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault. And Foucault speaks about something he calls biopower. Biopower or biopolitics. You know, it's a running joke in my household. When they say I'm taking a bio break, I'm like, oh man, I get it already. You don't have to rub it in. People need breaks from me, I know. So biopolitics. And biopolitics, in this analysis, he said at some point in the 17th, 18th, 16th century, I can't remember which, the way that people are governed changed. The ways that people are governed changed, right? It used to be kings and regimes and kingdoms, but that became increasingly expensive to maintain. So disciplinary regimes emerged. Ways of keeping people in tow, right, emerged. So biopolitics refers to how populations are maintained, right? Where do you get most of your, like if I'm not saying this is true for anyone here, but we're just thinking hypothetically. Someone doesn't have a job and still lives in his parents' house. The popular understanding is this person is no good, right? Until you get a job and until you start living and earning a wage. But where does the pressure to do this come from? From the police or from one's parents and neighborhood, right? It's like we are our own police officers, right? We don't, if a king doesn't do this, or a queen, a monarch doesn't do this. Instead, we are maintained by these relationships. We are incarcerated in them, so to speak. Biopolitics is how life is maintained. This was Foucault's analysis. A Cameroonian brother and recent friend, I think one of the greatest African philosophers alive today, and I just teased him recently about Cameroon losing in a football game to Nigeria. Achille Mbembe. Has anybody heard of Achille Mbembe? You've heard of Achille Mbembe? Achille Mbembe. What connects them? They're both bald. Foucault and Achille Mbembe. Mbembe was like, nah, it's not just the fact that life is being maintained, or populations are being maintained, or that there is this way of organizing bodies that maintains life. It's that part of maintaining populations is to kill off others. Okay? Is that running through biopolitics is a different kind of politics. Necropolitics. Okay? Necropolitics. Necro means death. It's that somewhere in this logic is the question, who is worthy? Whose life is worthy? Who can be killed? Like biopolitics is about making life and letting die. Make live and let die. Necropolitics is make die and let live. Okay? Think about the pandemic. There are people in homes and hospitals, and I remember particularly an example from the UK, where the government literally, doctors, people who signed the Hippocratic Oath, right? Doctors literally turned their backs on people who could not have access to healthcare. They're old. They can die, right? But those decisions inhabit these regimes of power, right? You must have heard about the people who try to cross into Europe. I think the Mediterranean. You know this story, sister? My brain is
was it Greece?
I think they're either Greece. I think it's Greece. Either Greece or no, it's Greece. It's Greece. And I think they're coming from Rwanda. They were on a boat, and they just pictures. They just died not just because there was an accident. It was how they died. It was how their bodies were dispensed with, right? Is that some bodies are dispensable and discardable within white modernity. They don't matter. They don't matter. The bodies of slaves that were brought to Kaistu Balongo, the most infamous port that received black bodies on the planet. More people went to Brazil, I'm sure you know this, than the United States. Like 11 million people approximately were transported across the Atlantic. 5 million went to Brazil, approximately. And most of them went through Kaistu Balongo. Many of them didn't make the trip, or they died upon arrival. How did they bury them? No, they didn't. They dumped their bodies and squeezed their bodies to a part of the city and buried and just burnt them with broken pots and shards of pottery and stuff like that. Some bodies don't matter within white modernity. And that's what Achille Mbembe is trying to say, that this moral fixture, this structure is also producing death. Death is part of what it's producing, right? Some bodies are not worth maintaining. That's necropolitics. This is whiteness we're talking about. This is whiteness in its dynamism, in its responsivity. Now, I'm not bald, but I've joined the conversation with these two bald men. It's not just that white modernity maintains populations, IDs, how we navigate the streets, traffic laws. It's not just the maintenance of life, it's also the dispensing of death. But there's another dynamic that I feel is noticeable here. And that is, something is happening today that feels strange, queer. It seems like white modernity is increasingly offering remedy as a way to recapture. I'm thinking of a way to put it. Healing is the things we take as useful as goals: safety, justice, healing, solution. It seems like in this very strange plot twist, we arrive at the end of the journey. Everything we've been fighting for as a people, we've been doing our activism work, we arrive, we lift a trophy, and then behind the scenes, in some kind of cinematic gesture, because I think cinematically most of the time, the villain is shaking, is rubbing the hands gleefully and saying, exactly what I wanted. Now I have you too. I will tell the story of Prometheus, a Greek titan. How many of you know Prometheus? Okay, you know the story of Prometheus tied to a rock. You know the story. You know the name of the rock. Was that Adam? You want to say it for the people?
Caucasia.
Thank you. Yep. Prometheus was tied to Caucasia, and a Mount Caucasia, a rock, right? And every morning he's eaten by Atos caucasus, which is Caucasian eagle, right? So the Greeks had it together. They knew their stuff. So Prometheus is tied there, as you know, as a punishment for his sins. He gives human beings the gift of fire. That was his first gift. His second gift is this analysis. Right? Because while he's tied there, and every morning the eagle comes and eats his liver. You know the story, right? He eats the liver, and in the night, you're like, in the night, the wound closes up, Wolverine style, just closes up. You know, he heals up nicely. But in the morning, the same thing happens again. Caucasian eagle. Caucasian eagle. Somewhere in my mind, I heard USA, USA. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be telling you everything in my mind. But the Caucasian eagle comes and eats the liver every morning. Again, eats the liver, and at night it grows out. Repeated cycle. It's a horrible punishment. Now, I use this example as a thought experiment. If you and I, who goes mountain climbing here? Sandra, you do? Sometimes? Whoa. Excellent. Sandra and I go, we go climbing. We go mountain climbing together. And we just noticed this dude in trouble, chained to a mountain. And we're like, you know, what's up? Let's go investigate. And you're saying, let's call 911. And I'm like, no, we don't need to do that. And maybe I shouldn't detail the story this much. But we come close to him. And then we notice that the wounds that he's supposedly bleeding out from are closing. The wounds are closing up. And so we're shocked about this, and we congratulate him. Like saying, congratulations on your... Something's happened, we don't understand this. This is a miracle, but you seem to be getting better. Prometheus would spit in our faces. Because in that moment, after all these eons, these years, Prometheus would be critically incapable of distinguishing between healing and trauma. Do you understand? Because the trauma is material for the healing, and the healing nourishes the trauma. In fact, Prometheus would prefer to die, because death would be a release.
Right.
Death would take him out of the place. Instead, the healing is part of the sinister nature of the punishment. I will heal you, but I will heal you because I need to keep you incarcerated. So a different dynamic. It's not just biopolitics and necropolitics, which is already part of biopolitics, a dynamism in biopolitics. It's something I call iatropolitics. Iatro means healing. Bless you, sister. Iatro means healing. It's from it's from medical intervention. The idea of iatro, it's Greek. It means wellness or healing or doctor or remedy or solution, right? It's but there's a term called iatrogenesis, which is when medical intervention reinforces the sickness. You know, like a surgeon leaving his gloves in your tummy. Wow, something like that. I'm so sorry for that. I can see you're making these animated faces. Liver and surgery. Okay, so that's the idea. When medical intervention becomes the crisis. When the ways we respond to the crisis become the crisis. Right? This is an iatropolitics. And what I'm trying to say here is that in the ways that we calculate healing, and of course there's some semantic diversity everywhere. This is not a universalizing gesture here. But in the ways we often think about healing, in the ways we often think about justice, in the ways we often think about solidarity, in the ways we often think about remedy and solution, we are seemingly going around in circles. If you ask yourself, what's more sinister than death, than the necropolitics? It feels like the zombification of bodies to instrumentalize them so that they work eternally in the plantation of your making. So whiteness is also becoming more intelligent. Whiteness is becoming intelligent in response to ethical flows. It needs to. It can see all the activism you're doing, like, oh, Okay, I know what to do. I'll give them what they want. There are 3 Chinese apocryphal curses. Right? You know this? You know? Yeah. Okay, let me say it right because it looks nice for me to say. The first one is. Okay, you need to say it.
May you live in interesting times.
Yes, may you live in interesting times. That's the first curse. It's apocryphal too because there isn't empirical evidence that anyone actually said this, but there's legend attaches it to China. And the second one, brother?
That's the one I got.
Okay. So we're stuck. No, I know the second one. The second one is, may you be seen by the emperor. May you be recognized by the emperor. May you actually be included in power.
Wow.
That's a curse.
Yeah.
The second curse. The third curse is the cursiest curse of all curses. It's may you get what you want.
Wow.
That's our natural politics. When we get what we want, when our speaking truth to power inadvertently incarcerates us within power, then whiteness is becoming more intelligent. Watch any Netflix B-class AI movie about a robot winning at the end of the day. When it gives you victory, it says, yes, we did it. But at the end, just before the
Credits roll. Yep.
something happens. The AI wins.
Still alive, right? You're right. It's still alive, right?
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that is why I feel at some level even solidarity, even the ways we express solidarity could reinforce the architecture of war.
Wow.
Let me say something here, that I don't think war happens once in a while. Right? Like, oh, there's a war. It started October 7th. I don't think war happens once in a while. I think we just get used to living in the violence of the normative.
Yeah.
Like we get used to it, and we kind of get accustomed to the war. We are at. Raise up your phones if you have phones here. Just let me see. You wave them like you just don't care. Raise your phones here. This phone is a technology of war and oppression. To get those phones into your hands, I don't want to go through the ethnography of how it had to travel to your hands, but you should know, and I'm sure you know, that Congolese children had to go into mines to mine cobalt to get you that. It's a war situation that gave you the luxuries that we take for granted. Right? Do you love donuts? If you love donuts, know that it's war as well. It's war against entire ecologies. It's the decimation of Sumatran tigers and orangutans in Indonesia.
Donuts?
Donuts.
Can you walk me through that?
Let's walk you through that. I forget the name of the giant oil company, the companies that, oil, that make oil.
Palm oil.
Say it again.
Halliburton. Halliburton.
Is it Halliburton?
That's what I don't know.
That's one. There's one that starts with a C.
Crisco.
Is it Crisco?
You know how to what kind of oil?
The oil, the vegetable oil.
Canola.
Not petroleum oil.
Canola. Palm oil.
Yeah?
Palm oil.
What up? All right, people. Palm oil. The oil you need to...
Also a technology of war. Right?
The oil you need to fry those donuts come from billion-dollar industries, and it's almost like they have an arrangement with Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts, like don't tell, we're not going to show you how the sausage is made, but the oil comes from really the trees and the ecologies in Indonesia, not just Indonesia kill species in order to get the oil that fries the donuts. That's just a simple epigraphic of it, right? So every time you eat a donut, you're already complicit in webs
Or some chicken,
or
some pork,
or something.
all of it.
There is no purity to be gained here, right? And this is not also a sermon against donuts.
I ain't never eaten a donut again. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you might as well throw your phone away too. Right?
At least it's used.
This is not an invitation to purity, because there's a lot of, especially in the political left, it seems the energy is, well, I don't want to cause suffering, so I'm going to retreat into a supposedly transcendental space where there's no suffering at all. But that transcendental space is exactly what colonialism looks like. Because the idea that I can be removed from my imbrications, why am I doing this? That I can be removed from my imbrications with suffering and oppression is exactly what whiteness is. Whiteness seeks purity. James Hillman would speak about whiteness as the search for purity. It wants to remove itself from its material entanglements. And so even in our attempts to address our very troubling entanglements with land and people and suffering, we kind of deepen the intelligence of whiteness as escape. And that is why I feel that whiteness, it needs a different kind of response. It needs a different kind of energy. The takedown capitalism is good, but whiteness is just too intelligent for those kinds of measures, right? Because in the act of taking down capitalism, for instance, you might find yourself willing to buy a takedown capitalism t-shirt.
You have one, right?
So here's where the idea of white syncopation comes in. And this is just concepts don't come up from nowhere. They come as in, they're forced into being, because something needs to be addressed, okay? I've had beautiful conversations with black scholars from around the world, the United States, in the Caribbean, in Africa, and we constantly speak about whiteness and white supremacy. What I've been talking about. It's just that sometimes we speak about white supremacy as if it's eternal and just there. And I don't think, like I said, starting this out, that I think whiteness is material. It's subject to flows. It's subject to the elements. It can be retired. It can be composted. And I'm not saying that humans can do this unilaterally. Like someone just comes out with a brilliant book or manifesto and then does the Thanos snap and then whiteness disappears. I'm not saying that that's how it works, but I'm saying it can die. It lives, it can die, or it can transmutate into something else. And how that happens, in my view, is white syncopation. I borrowed the term syncopation from rhythm theory, musical theory. Is anyone a musical person here? You drum, you play, okay? You dance? You dance, okay. So the idea of syncopation, brother, you know what syncopation is?
Now I'm nervous because you put me on the spot, but yeah.
Sorry, brother. You want to say something about it, or should I?
Well, syncopation, like
I'm
the
always
beat.
wanting to listen to other ways of framing stuff.
Yeah, like the beat, like, the rhythm.
Somebody's doing it already.
Yeah. The it could be beat, tempo,
Yes.
rhythm,
Yes.
all of that.
There's often the attempt to divide into the upbeat and the downbeat.
Right.
Right? The upbeat and the downbeat.
That's right.
And the downbeat is often signaled with the kick drum. Okay? The upbeat is the hi-hat, right? The snare. So some scholars think about the downbeat as the deterministic repeating tendencies of modernity, right? Dum, dum. It's almost imperial in its continuity, right? Most of our activisms repeat these dominant tendencies. Okay? The upbeat is anything between, right? I wish I could play a Michael Jackson track. Maybe, I don't know, Billie Jean is syncopated. There's a lot of syncopation there. Syncopation is how danceability happens, right? Disco is like the downbeat, and there's a wonderful history of disco that I think you should be aware of, that just talks about how some musical producers were scandalized by the rhythmic danceability of black music, right? And so they kind of reduced it to the because this is easy to program.
That's right. That's right.
It's easy to put in a program.
It's not jazz.
It's not. It's
No, it's not jazz.
Jazz is syncopation.
It is not
right?
gospel.
Jazz is syncopation. It's all the things in between. The upbeat, penetrating the downbeat, right? It's doing something else in there, and that's syncopation. Syncopation is how things move, right? It's how things become different. So what I mean by white syncopation then is all the destabilizing forces, the counter-hegemonic destabilizing forces that trouble the territoriality of whiteness. Again, the destabilizing forces that trouble the territoriality of whiteness. I have a longer definition. This is just part of my text that I'm writing out, but I felt let me just read this out. White syncopation refers to the destabilizing forces and events that disrupt the dominant ontology of whiteness, of the citizen, of liberalism and anthropocentrism. Okay? White syncopation traces the generative radical potential in cracks and fissures produced through the failures of whiteness to indefinitely sustain the myth of the individualized man, right? Have you ever been driving and you just parked your car because you were feeling grief that was unnamed, and you just had to cry? You just felt overwhelmed by something, and you couldn't trace it down to something within your own personological experience, right? Many people seem to be going through that. I'm reading many reports. There was one that was sent to me recently about people in Brazil feeling overwhelmed. This idea that we're in the face of a mass disabling event. White syncopation is a mass disabling event. It's all the things streaming in that is queering identity, queering bodies, queering how we show up in the world, queering our names, queering our supposed privacy, right? It seems that we're now exposed to the feelings of others. We were supposed to, whiteness promised us our own condo. We were supposed to have our own private condos. There you go, 40 acres and we were supposed to have all that to ourselves, our own private property, especially the private property of ourselves, right? And then all of a sudden, it's being invaded. It's being invaded by psychic events, ecological events, geological events. All these are forces of white syncopation. When the world goes crazy, right? When certitude and confidence in the future is blurred by something opaque that stands in the way. That's white syncopation. It's that we can no longer draw a geometric line of confidence from now to the future that we were promised. Right? We're told that, oh, we're going to get AI, and AI will take away the economic burdens of labor. We won't have to work so hard anymore. All we need to do is just develop these robots, and then we can have leisurely time with each other. We can have all the time in our hands. But it seems with AI, and it seems with all our technologies, our phones and all our computers, we have even less time. Right? We have even less time. Because we did not compute for the fact that we are not just outside of our technologies, we are also used by technologies. We didn't compute that. It's just like, I have a very dear friend, Geshi. You know Geshi, right? You know Geshi? Geshi and the course. We were dancing, yeah. Geshi is an urban planner, and sometime in South Africa, in Johannesburg, she was with some men in a vehicle, and they were speaking about expanding the roads, or just, this development. And they said, let's do that so we can reduce traffic. We need to expand the roads. And Geshi said, gentlemen, I don't know where in the world you've ever seen where expanding the road actually reduces the number of cars on the road. Right? But expand the road, more cars on the road. So it seems like we're in a toxic cycle. Our solutions only retain the logic of the problems that we're trying to address. Our search for justice and our speaking truth to power, where our voices are instrumentalized and used. Oh, I have to tell you about this movie on Netflix. Is it on Netflix? I can't remember. I think it's called Black Mirror or something like that. Yeah. And there's an episode in it where there's this very crazy future. It presents a very troubling future where everything seems to be ruled by a reality TV show. And it's absurd. How it's absurd. And then this guy gets on stage and is literally critiquing the whole thing, calling out the stupidity and absurdity of the whole of society and saying, this is horrible, this is dangerous, we shouldn't be doing stuff like this. And then the producers listen, and then after a while they just get up and they applaud. And they say, we're so excited with what you just did. Could you do it on Mondays and Wednesdays and on weekends, and we'll pay you for it. This is iatro politics. It's how we are re-engineered into sustaining whiteness in its coloniality. And white syncopation is the wafting forces, the forces psychic and geological and archetypal that break the citizen. You are the citizen, you are the fetish of whiteness. It wants to protect your dissociation, your independence. And so every time something comes and disturbs that, something is up for grabs. Anytime a crack appears, whiteness sends white blood cells. I should write that down.
To the rescue.
To the rescue, to close the wounds. This is the reason why my dear sister, Professor Erin Manning, says whiteness polices cracks, right? Or while my other colleague, Professor Wendy, of psychology, would say that psychology is the policeman of capitalism, right? It's that our disciplinary regimes are about containing and keeping us in the room. I was speaking about solidarity. I'm not sure how I moved here. And I'm trying to say here that solidarity, even our expressions of solidarity, maintain the architecture of the individual that saves, right? The individual that saves. And I can tell you many accounts of solidarity received by the global south, from the salvific north, and how we're still suffering from that solidarity. So, are there sensuous solidarities? Are there other kinds of solidarities possible? Are there other kinds of movements in the world possible? Or are we dead to this and trapped in this cyclicity? Are there openings possible? This is my question. Are there openings possible? I think openings are possible. I think an ethnography of a crack is possible. But we need to know and develop and cultivate communities and capacities to hold the cracks. And this is where we start to talk about making sanctuary. Has anyone here heard about the idea of claiming sanctuary, which was an old medieval practice?
Yes.
You know about this practice, claiming sanctuary? If you've watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Logan, you know what I'm talking about? But if you've watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame, then you should know a little bit about claiming sanctuary. Before lawyers became the cosmic forces that they are today, we had there was this medieval practice borrowed from pagan traditions, actually, in which the church allowed the fugitive a space of rest, okay, a space of rest from their accusers. So I'm sure you know about Salem and the witch trials and all of that. If you were accused, you were basically dead, and they would chase you. But you could possibly get to a church nearby. Just pray that you're near one. Get to a church and hold some aspect of the church. So some people hold the pillars of the church or the Haggle Day. You know what the Haggle Day is? Haggle Day. It's the gargoyle, the door knocker, right? The giant thing that is missing now in our architecture, mostly. And they would hold it, and if you held the gargoyle, which is interesting because the gargoyle was always monstrous. The gargoyle was always monstrous, and that monstrosity was the welcome into hospitality. I've always wondered about that. Why not a cherub or an angel? Why would you put a monster at the entrance of sanctuary? There's something archetypal happening here. Okay? So they will hold an aspect, and you would say, I claim sanctuary, and then they let you in. And then in there, most of the time they would offer you the Eucharist. You know, they would offer you the flesh and the blood. And then you would have to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and then you'll be sent an exile. You were never let back into the society. Sent an exile. That practice is mostly gone. I say mostly because I heard of some accounts happening in Belgium, in Brussels, where, who said yes? You heard about it?
Where the nuns hid the refugees.
Hid the refugees, yes, they hid them.
And they did civil disobedience.
Exactly, and they didn't allow the authorities to enter the church.
We did that here in the United States in the 80s.
In the 80s?
With people coming from
El Salvador.
Interesting. And the government couldn't enter?
No.
Like, did they try to, like, come into the church premises?
Yeah.
No, but if the people like went out, like they went to the drugstore to get some cough syrup,
Right.
boom.
And they did enter one church in Tucson. The government actually infiltrated
Yes.
and then also entered, and there were arrests that happened.
Oh, okay. In Belgium, they didn't. Somehow they respect.
But there were 1,000 congregations that were sanctuaries in
Right.
the United States.
Right.
And the government did not.
Right.
And in the end, people were smuggled to Canada in the bottom of vans.
All this in the 80s or?
Yes.
In the 80s?
And more recently, there's been some too, yeah.
Sanctuary cities, yes.
But also sanctuary and churches too. Churches been,
Yes.
there's a Quaker meeting in Albuquerque that had somebody in sanctuary for them.
Very interesting.
Like
I wish all
2016.
these accounts are maybe put into some document.
Yeah.
There's archives.
I would really love to read about it. Logan?
There's archives at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley.
Oh, I'm gonna get my hand in.
Yeah, in Berkeley, it's the archives of the '80s sanctuary movement.
Okay.
Yeah.
So mostly, it's missing. We have lawyers now. We have a different judicial system, right? And so this inspired my conceptualization of making, not claiming sanctuary, but making sanctuary. And I want to emphasize what sanctuary is for here. When we speak the word sanctuary, we're mostly talking about a sense of safety, and we need that for people who are in precarious circumstances. We need that kind of support there. But making sanctuary is a different longing here. The person or the thing or the thing that we're creating sanctuary for is the syncopation. Is the crack. Is failure. Right? And so the making sanctuary is a political project. It's a political project about cultivating capacity to stay within cracks. And by cracks, again, I mean the forces that are destabilizing whiteness. If we can do, I wish we had time to actually trace out the body of what Sylvia Winter calls the man. Okay? The human, the man, the colonial man. And the colonial man will not look like an anthropomorphical, that's not the colonial man. The colonial man will look like goings in and goings out. It will look like a whole map of practices. Man is a practice. The colonial territory of man is a practice. If we can do some kind of simple ethnography of it, you might be able to understand why I say that syncopation is the blurring of those trajectories, of those cartographies. It's failure coming as a nomad and entering into settlement. It's grief. I'm saying, is there a political project that can help us hold space for grieving well? For grieving well. I just want you to know that grieving is pathological. Grieving is pathological, especially in the DSM manual. Right? The DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. This is the Bible of clinical psychologists, right, and psychiatrists. And it is, especially in the 5th iteration, the latest iteration, grieving for more than a year is deemed pathological.
Wow.
So if you grieve for more than a year, there's something wrong with you. And you become potentially discardable. Or
They want to give you medication.
Or medicated.
Yeah.
Right? And grief is treated that way because it gets in the way of what? Productivity. You're not going to be a productive citizen if your position, your posture is bent in a particular way. That's why I think of grief as mutiny. It's mutiny against the rectilinear self.
Yes.
Right? How can we hold space for that kind of energy? This politics I'm speaking about is not a politics of already determined answers. It's a politics of experimentation in crisis. It's a call to identify the ways that we are being shocked and moved from our center of gravity, the axis, the ways that we've been supported within modernity. And to actually ask the question, can we host these forces? Can we give them bread and meal? Can we cultivate a way to hold it in? Grief is just one example of the forces that are blowing through. Is there a way to hold this energy? To accommodate it, to let it breathe, to let it live for a while. So the sanctuary is not about making space for us to be safe. Sanctuary is about cultivating nourishment for the crack, right? Decorating and libating it, and dwelling in that place. 42,000 years ago, proto-human communities did the same thing. I love to tell this story. You know the story of Adam's transitory geomagnetic event? You know the story? Adam knows the story. Who's read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Who wrote the book?
Adams.
University of New Zealand, a couple of years ago, excavated a tree, trunks of trees called a kauri.
I know what Kauri means. It's a I have Maori family.
Uh-huh.
It means it's a spiral.
Yes. No, that's koru.
Oh, you're right. That's Koru.
That's koru.
Oh my
Koru
god.
is the spiral,
Thank
the
you.
fern.
I
Right?
mixed it up.
Kauri is Kauri. I think that's how it's spelled. So these are trees that have long lives. They're ancient elders, right? So they read their rings, and 42,000 years ago, specifically, around 42,000 years ago, a cataclysmic event happened to the planet. Solar radiation, our atmosphere was broken down, and solar radiation came and burnt the surface, right? You know about it? Flipping, it was a polar shift of some kind. And the surface was rendered unlivable, right? For most parts. And the reason why it's called Adam's geomagnetic event, because it's 42. And the Hitchhiker's Guide, right? Hitchhiker's Guide, so if you've read it, you know that the number 42 is significant, because the number 42 is the answer to everything. I'm not going to I don't care about spoiling things. I'm Nigerian, we spoil stuff. 42 is an answer to everything, the number to everything. So it's named after Douglas Adams, to just honor that legacy. But 42,000 years ago, this happened. Now, other scholars notice that it coincides with the same time that around the planet, cave art erupted. The same time of crisis was also a time of descending, of descent. The Greeks would call it katabasis. Katabasis. It's almost like when there's a catastrophe, there's a katabasis. A catastrophe, I've forgotten how Stephen Jenkinson would describe catastrophe. The etymology of the word catastrophe, very interesting. It has something to do with elders singing in a procession that goes under, right? That there is a descending into the earth. And this is what this proto-human population did. When the skies turned red, they went under. And they proliferated cave art of different kinds. You might have seen the red ochre, on the walls of caves everywhere. They created art. Did this solve the problem? No. It was a way of cultivating capacity to be in response. Right? It was a way of cultivating new kinds of subjectivities, new kinds of sensibilities. It was a way of coming alive to the crisis. We are mostly dead to the crisis of the Anthropocene. In our rushing about to get solutions, we're dead to what it's inviting us to do, to descend, to fall to the earth. When Shango, the god, passes, we don't throw stones at the hurricane. You fall prostrate to the ground. To prostrate oneself, and that's why Yoruba people continue to prostrate. The energy and the technology of prostration lives in our ordinary activities. We've learned that in times of crisis, you offer libation, or you prostrate your body to the ground. And that's the idea of a sensual solidarity, or making sanctuary. It's a political project of cultivating capacity and experimenting and risking touching the world and losing faith and finding other notions of grace and holding space for cracks. This is the energy of this moment. Because if healing keeps us, just a quick one, you know that slave ships, after some time, started to invent safety nets to keep those bodies on the ship, right? Because they would want to escape and just jump out. They would rather end their lives than continue on to the plantation.
The crime of war.
Exactly. And so the captains decided, maybe the thing to do here is to save them. So we'll save them. So we'll put safety nets out there. And so they put safety nets and they caught them. The only thing that they didn't do was to put a placard on the walls of the ship saying, "We care about your safety." This is how safety itself can take on insidious You might think, oh, that's slave ships. It happened in China, where, you know this? Foxconn. Where people, tens of thousands, I think, working in this camp, military camp-like place where they produce everyday objects for the global north. Your phones and your systems, where you see made in China, it mostly came out from Foxconn, those compounds, militaristic compounds. And because of the horrible conditions of working, they would jump out of the skyscrapers, they would jump out. So what did the CEO and the leaders did? They also made safety nets.
But that's not safety, that's insurance.
Well, they call this safety net for a reason, because it's to keep them safe from jumping and ending their lives. It's semantic diversity here, but still the kernel of safety as potentially insidious.
It is insidious, according to. Have you read? I don't remember the author's name because I'm terrible with names, but How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World.
No, I haven't.
He's an Aboriginal Indigenous man, and
Oh, Tyson!
yeah, there we go.
I was just bashing him yesterday.
You were bashing him?
On the phone.
Oh, I was like, oh,
Yeah,
my
he's a
bad.
dear brother.
Yeah,
And we're
so
both
he
autistic
says
fathers.
safety is an illusion, and it is
Yeah.
insidious. It is
Yes.
whiteness. All we have is protection
Yeah.
from each other,
Okay.
with each other, and spirit, and all the things.
Yeah. I love Tyson. If you don't know Tyson, please read his work. I always make fun of him that he's like the birth child of Russell Crowe and some other actor. He looks he's a dear brother. That's one I'm trying to say.
Yonka Porter.
Yonka Porter. He wrote a book. What's it?
Santa.
Dear brother.
Bayo, were you saying safety is? I don't think I agree that safety is an illusion, and I'm just wondering if you were saying safety is an illusion.
No, I'm not saying safety is an illusion. I don't use the word illusion because of its connotations of stable reality and a reality that appears. I don't use illusion. I'm saying safety can take on insidious forms.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can take on. When does embrace become asphyxiation?
Right.
At what point does it become like, oh, I feel embraced? Wait a minute. I can't breathe. There you go.
Also, if you read his book, you might change your mind.
So that's
I might not.
You might. You might not.
That's the idea. That safety can take on a dimension that we hardly expect. That's the implication here.
Yeah.
But let's bring things to a close. And I've spoken about whiteness and white syncopation, iatropolitics and necropolitics and biopolitics. I'm so sorry, everyone, if this has been so overwhelming. But this feels like the energy that needs to be. This feels like the thing that needs to be said. And if I'm going to travel and around the world, then I want to speak the thing that issue is inviting me to say. Okay, and say it, knowing that it's not some universalizing truth. It's an invitation to reconsider. To reconsider, to see differently, to look again. Prophecy means looking again, right? The etymology of prophecy is not predicting the future, it's looking again. Prophecy is reconvening time differently, right? We are at a crossroads as a species because we've been managed and controlled and dominated and corporealized by whiteness as a planetary ritual. And it might seem that there's no way out, but I think the way out is the very thing that we've been talking about. The processuality of the universe is the way out. The idea, and I'm going to repeat the words of my dear friend Karen Barad in response to Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde says that the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. right? And Karen Barad responds, but the master's tools will not stay faithful to the master for too long. Even the master's tools will not stay faithful to the master for too long. And that is the hope of decoloniality. That things will change, that things are changing. Even captivity cannot be captivity all by itself. The slave ship that travels, that pretends to be closed, has a trickster inside it. And that trickster is inseminating the world and creolizing it from within. The very story of Yoruba spirituality in exile is the story of hiding as an act of courage, right? Hiding a god within another god. Right? You know the story of Santeria and I was going to say capoeira, but that's not
Catholicism.
You know, the idea that Eshu lives in the body of Peter, right? Or Ogun lives in the body of Jesus, right? The idea that things live within other bodies and are doing things with other bodies breaks the idea of coloniality down. You might plant your flag on my back, but my back is larger than my body. Right? My back is a territory.
Is the Rome bee?
Is the what?
Is the Rome bee?
Is the
Your back is the Rome bee? Is that the one that grows the Rome beetle?
Oh, yes, the road beetle. Thank you. I like how you're weaving things together. My body will fly, right? That you may keep me tethered here, but even my shackles will grow barnacles. Even my shackles are not just still, right? So that is how I would want to invite us. If you ask me, what's the solution, then I don't have the solution. This is not a solutioneering retreat. This is an invitation to a politics. The way that me and my people, the people that I work closely with, the people that I've been thinking closely with for years now, are trying to invite stuff to happen around the world as we're enabled to do so, is we're inviting spaces of experimentation. This is a time for experimentation, right? This is a time for us to touch our sacred hypocrisies. And by sacred hypocrisy, I mean to suggest that yes, your phone is made with the blood of Congolese kids. The resolution is not to throw away your phones, it's to hold the space for that. And notice that you're imbricated. Whatever you do, you're imbricated with suffering of some kind. That's your sacred hypocrisy. Right? We're trying to do stuff with pedagogy that is more than a conference, more than writing a book or an essay. We want to invite spaces of carnivalesque experimentation. Next year, 2025, in 7 places around the world, we will be hosting carnivals simultaneously. In India, in the US, in Italy, in Brazil, in Australia, how many is that now? 5. In Kenya, and in the West Bank. And these carnivals are not parties. This is not Burning Man. Right? This is grandmothers telling stories. This is people being with each other and hosting failure as a gift. This is staying with the trouble of our inability to show up, right? These forces are already in the world, right? The pandemic exposed a lot of things. I don't know if you heard about the lying down movement.
Yes.
You heard about the lying down movement? Lying down is good, they would say. The Chinese government did not like this. It got in the way of productivity. But these are the forces of failure that are blowing through the world. What is ministering to you? What is inviting you? What is your gift of failure? Your theology of failure? And how might you invite a community around that? In your neighborhood, in your faith community, in your community. How might you invite a staying with the trouble of that? That's my question for you. You're raising your hand for a question? No. Say, please.
Just something was itching to come out, but I
Itch.
haven't figured out how to articulate it yet. But the first word, obviously, the word that's coming to mind is, like, how far are you talking, right? Because
How far am I?
I'm just trying to trouble you a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
The spirit of that.
I'm trouble. I should be troubled in return.
Yeah, like, I hear you.
Yeah.
And I respect it. And I feel like some experiments can garner on the bordering of survivability, right? Like,
Yes.
my survival is at stake.
Yes.
So the level of experimentation that I can do,
Yes.
as opposed to what someone else can do,
Yes.
that's a conversation in and
Yes.
of itself.
Absolutely. I agree with you totally. Experimentation is not universal, right? We experiment within the circumstances that we're permitted to, right? How we hold space for what comes next is always contextual. There's no decontextualized solidarity here, right? We have to hold space within the forces that allow us to hold space for. So the politics I'm speaking about is about staying with the locality and the spirituality of our locality, where we are. You were speaking about the genius of a place, right? How would I invite Nigerians to stay with the trouble of missing electricity? We don't have electricity as constant as the United States does. They would have to address questions in their own genius, in the intelligence of where they are, right? There's no flattened world here. So I agree with what you're saying. This is the invitation here. But a politics, the take home, if you will, is that a politics is necessary. A different kind of politics here. It can't be a politics of critique alone. A politics of critique can get us only so far before it starts to depend on the epistemological resources of the critiqued.
Yeah.
Did you hear that? Before we start to look like the people we're critiquing. Yeah, you need the knowledge resources of settlement to critique settlement, and then because of that you get imbricated within settlement. Right. So we need a different kind of politics. What I'm saying, I call it the politics of a third way, where the third way is not. There are many ways that the idea of a third way has been deployed, but is, remember what I drew the other time? 1, 2, 3. The crossing out, and the crossing out is a form of. Is a theology of failure, is a refusal to abide by the binary that we've been living with. I think I want to end here, and just I thank you. I thank you for staying with the things that have been said. I thank you for listening. I thank you for challenging. I thank you for interrupting. I thank you for failing to interrupt. I thank you for all the ways. Thank you for all the ways you showed up here. There's a lot more to be said that language and bodily limitations may not allow for now, but our journey has just begun. Our inquiry continues. Thank you very much.